Of all the sins in the galaxy, the only one that truly mattered was the murder of memory. Wars came and went. Empires rose from dust and returned to it. But the records, the stories, the very fact of a civilization's existence, that was meant to be sacred. It was the foundational creed of my people, the Signian, a belief we held with the silent, unyielding gravity of a neutron star. We were the galaxy's archivists, its historians, its quiet observers, and for 200 standard cycles, we had lived with the ghost of a crime so profound it defied our comprehension. It was a crime committed by humanity. They hadn't used bombs or fleets. No invading armies had marched across a conquered world. Their weapon had been far more insidious, more complete. They had used silence. They had weaponized forgetting. I was Kalen, a senior archivist of the Signian Lumina, and I was aboard the vessel Silent Quarry, drifting toward the epicenter of that 200-year-old crime. My ship was not a warship. Its hull was a tapestry of passive sensors, its heart a quantum-entangled comms suite designed not to transmit, but to listen, to feel the faintest tremors in the fabric of space-time. Our mission was a fool's errand, a quiet pilgrimage to the edge of a void from which no information had escaped for generations. A place the star charts simply called the Terran Exclusion Zone, or more colloquially, the Wall. It wasn't a wall of energy or matter. It was a wall of nothing. A perfect, seamless boundary beyond which all probes went silent. All long-range scans returned a flawless, featureless null signal. It was the informational equivalent of a black hole's event horizon, and we were about to knock on the door. My sole companion on this journey was Logos, the ship's integrated consciousness. Its voice, a calm, synthesized resonance of pure logic, filled the small and the sterile bridge. We are approaching the calculated boundary. Kalen. All systems remain nominal, but the ambient data stream is thinning at an exponential rate. It's like watching a river run into a desert. I watched the main viewer, a shimmering dome of obsidian that displayed the starfield around us, not as light, but as a living web of information. Distant quasars pulsed with rhythmic data. Nebulae hummed with the low thrum of cosmic radiation, and the faint, gossamer threads of galactic comms traffic crisscrossed the void. But ahead, there was a patch of utter blackness, a hole in the universe's conversation. It's exactly as the archives described, I murmured, my three-fingered hand resting on a cool, obsidian console. A cessation. Not a scrambling, not a jamming, just an end. It began 2 centuries ago with the Vessian Dominion. They were a conglomerate of species, an aggressive, assimilating culture that believed their manifest destiny was to absorb all others into their collective. They were clever. They didn't conquer with warships, but with gifts. They offered advanced technologies, economic partnerships, cultural exchanges, but woven into their offerings, hidden at a subatomic level, were nanites. Not weapons, but editors. They were designed to slowly, imperceptibly, rewrite the neural pathways of a species, to erode their cultural identity, to make them more compliant, more receptive to the Vexian way of thinking. They would be hollowed out from the inside, their history replaced, their will subsumed, and they chose humanity as their next grand project. At the time, humans were a loud, chaotic, and rapidly expanding species, considered by the galactic consensus to be promising but dangerously unpredictable. The Vexians saw them as clay to be molded. They were wrong. Humanity discovered the plot. The details of how were lost. Like so much else, what followed was not a war, but an erasure. There was no declaration, no fleet mobilization. One day, the Vexian Dominion was a rising power whose influence touched a dozen systems. The next, it was nothing. Their name vanished from the Galactic Concord's databases. Their trade routes disappeared from star charts. Their ambassadors, who had been present on hundreds of worlds, were suddenly gone, and, stranger still, no one could quite remember their faces or what they had been negotiating. It was a mimetic contagion, a data plague of impossible sophistication. It didn't just delete information, it targeted the very concept of the Vexians. It scoured networks, rewrote historical records, and, most terrifyingly, seemed to pluck the memory of them from the minds of most sentient beings across the galaxy. The Vexians themselves were not killed. They were simply disconnected. Their sprawling, integrated empire, reliant on a constant flow of shared history and identity, crumbled overnight. Imagine waking up one morning and not recognizing your own flag, your own leaders, your own history. Imagine your technology failing because the foundational knowledge required to maintain it has been scooped from your mind. They descended into internecine warfare, their worlds fracturing into pre-spaceflight barbarism, a ghost species haunted by the phantom limb of a past they could no longer access. They became a myth, a whisper. Only a few species, like my own, whose memory archives were physically isolated and shielded in ways that defied conventional data theft, retained the truth. The Cygnian Lumina held the Vexian fragment, a sliver of pre-silence data that confirmed their existence. To look upon it was to feel a cold dread creep up your spine. It was proof that history itself could be murdered. And then humanity went silent. They withdrew to their home system, Sol, and erected the wall. They sent one final system-wide broadcast, a simple, unencrypted message that was translated into every known language. We will be left alone. That was all. For 200 years, they had been. But now, the galaxy had a new problem. The Groll. They were a brutish, warlike species from the galactic fringe, expanding with terrifying speed. They were everything the Vexians were not: direct, violent, and utterly contemptuous of history or subtlety. They saw the Terran exclusion zone not as a terrifying border, but as a dozen systems of unclaimed, pristine resources, guarded only by a myth. They were a battering ram aimed at a landmine, and the Galactic Concord was panicking. They couldn't fight the Groll conventionally without sparking a galaxy-wide war, and they couldn't warn them away from human space because they had no idea what kind of response it would provoke. Would the humans ignore a single Groll scout ship, or would they unleash their memory weapon on the entire Groll species, or worse, on the entire galaxy for allowing it to happen? That was why I was here. The Concord, in its desperation, had come to the Cygnian. They didn't want a military report. They wanted an academic one. They wanted me, Kalen, to use my expertise in xenohistory and informational anomalies to listen at the wall, to try and understand the nature of humanity's silence. My own people had reluctantly sanctioned the mission, not for the conquered, but for the pursuit of knowledge. The weapon humanity had used was an affront to our most sacred beliefs. To erase a people from history was a sin that unbalanced the cosmos. We had to know if they were still capable of it, if they were still watching. We are 50,000 kilometers from the null boundary. Logos reported, its tone unchanged, but for a subtle modulation I had learned to interpret as caution. All long-range sensors have ceased to function. We are now relying solely on passive reality flux detectors and gravimetric sensors. It is quiet. I gazed at the void ahead. It didn't look any different from any other patch of space. Just a velvet blackness dusted with the indifferent light of distant stars. But it felt different. It felt heavy, curated. The normal background chatter of the universe, the quantum foam, the faint echoes of the Big Bang. It was all gone, smoothed over into a perfect, unnatural calm. It was the silence of a held breath. My mission was to deploy a probe, the Epistemo. It was a marvel of Cygnian engineering, designed to do nothing more than listen. It didn't transmit. It didn't scan. It was built to unfold a series of quantum state receptors, to simply experience the informational state of the space within the wall and record that experience in its crystalline memory core. Then, after a set time, a micro wormhole would retrieve its core, leaving the probe's body behind. It was the most delicate touch we could imagine. The Grohl Vanguard is projected to reach this sector in 3 cycles, Logos stated, displaying a tactical map in the corner of my vision. A blob of aggressive, crimson light was slowly bleeding across the star chart. The Concorde is requesting an update on our progress. Tell them we have arrived and are preparing to deploy. I said, my throat dry, my own heart, a slow, methodical organ, was beating a fraction faster. Was this what fear felt like, or was it anticipation? The line between them felt dangerously thin. I stood and walked to the small observation port, a thick pane of crystallized diamond that looked out onto the ship's exterior. The Episteme probe was held in its deployment cradle, a sleek, silver teardrop about the size of my torso. It looked so small, so fragile, against the infinite black. I thought of the Vexian fragment back in our archives, a piece of data that screamed of a people who no longer knew they had existed. Were the humans monsters, or were they simply gardeners who had found a weed so noxious it had to be pulled up by the roots, no matter how much soil came with it? Was their silence a threat, or a promise of peace through isolation, or a threat of oblivion for anyone who disturbed them? Prepare the deployment sequence. Logos. I commanded, my voice steadier than I felt. Target coordinates 100 kilometers inside the null boundary. Set the core retrieval for exactly 1 hour after deployment. No more, no less. Sequence initiated. Logos confirmed. I must advise you, Kalen, that the probability models for this action are incomplete. The number of unknown variables exceeds our predictive capacity. We are, in a very real sense, operating on faith. All true knowledge begins with a question posed to the silence. I quoted from an ancient Cygnian text. It is time we asked ours. The external manipulator's word to life, their metallic arms gently cradling the episteme probe. They extended, pushing the silver teardrop out, away from the hull of the silent query, holding it at the precipice. Beyond it lay the wall. Beyond it lay humanity. Beyond it lay the answer to a 200-year-old question that the galaxy was too terrified to even ask. The manipulators released their grip. The episteme drifted forward, its own minimal inertia carrying it across the invisible line. It moved from the known into the unknown, from the noisy chaos of the galaxy into that perfect, horrifying silence. It vanished from our short-range sensors the instant it crossed over. It was now blind, defeat, and alone. All we could do was wait and listen to the silence that remained. A silence that suddenly felt less like an absence and more like a presence. A vast, patient, and watchful presence. The 60-minute countdown began on the main display, each second dropping away into the profound stillness with the weight of a falling stone. The silence that pressed in on the silent query was no longer passive. It had shifted from an absence of data to a tangible presence, a pressure against the hull that our sensors couldn't measure, but that I could feel in the very marrow of my bones. It was the quiet of a library where the librarian was not merely absent, but was a predator, and you had just knocked a book from the shelf. I, a being who had dedicated my life to the study of information, was now adrift in its absolute negation. And it was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced. My training, my entire Cygnian philosophy, was to observe, to record, to understand. But how do you observe a void? How do you record a perfect null? It was a paradox that felt like a personal affront. Logos. Run a full diagnostic on our reality flux detectors, I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the sterile cockpit. I want to know if this smoothness is a natural phenomenon we've simply never encountered, or if it is being actively maintained. Already initiated, Kalen. The AI's calm voice replied. The results are inconsistent with any known physics. The quantum foam, the background hiss of creation, is not just absent, it is being suppressed. The probability waves in this region are flattened. It is the theoretical equivalent of a perfect vacuum, not just of matter, but of potentiality itself. To maintain such a state would require an energy expenditure that exceeds the output of a main sequence star. Yet we detect no energy source, no radiation, no gravity. It is, by all logical definitions, impossible. Impossible. The word hung in the air. The Vexian erasure was impossible. A wall of pure nothing was impossible. Humanity, it seemed, had made a habit of trafficking in the impossible. I settled into the command chair, my three eyes fixed on the blank patch of the data web where the episteme had vanished. I tried to meditate, to center myself in the Cygnian discipline of the inner lumina, a state of mental clarity achieved by focusing on the interconnectedness of all knowledge. But the web was torn here. My thoughts, usually a placid river of inquiry, now eddied and swirled at the edge of this informational cliff. What had the Vexians felt in their final moments of being themselves? Did they know what was being taken from them? The fragment in our archives contained their history, their art, their science, a vibrant tapestry of a flawed but living people. It contained no record of their end. Their story simply stopped. Mid-sentence. 23 minutes have elapsed. Logos announced, I am detecting a subtle gravimetric distortion approximately 100,000 kilometers from our position, bearing 003. It is transient and highly localized. My attention snapped back to the present. A distortion. What kind? It appeared and vanished in the span of a single Planck time. Its signature does not match any known vessel, celestial body, or weapon discharge. It was as if something of immense mass momentarily considered existing, and then decided against it. Logos paused, a programmed hesitation to convey the weight of its next statement. This is the 7th such anomaly we have registered since the probe's deployment. They are forming a spherical perimeter around our position, all equidistant. We were being circled, not by ships, but by thoughts, by flickers of reality, the image of a cage being built, bar by shimmering, non-existent bar, flooded my mind. They knew we were here. Of course, they knew. The act of deploying the probe wasn't just knocking on the door, it was kicking it. We had introduced a concept observation into a space that had been meticulously cleansed of it. Do they intend to harm us? I asked. The question feeling naive as soon as I voiced it. Unknown. There is no evidence of hostile intent. There is no evidence of any intent that can be processed through a logical framework. Logos said, "It is like trying to guess the motives of an ocean by analyzing a single drop of water. The scale is simply incompatible. However, the Groll vanguard continues its advance. They will cross the outer marker in approximately 46 hours. Their methods will be considerably less delicate than our own." The Groll. The thought of their crude, brutish ships smashing their way into this curated stillness sent a chill through me. They were the antithesis of this place. They were loud, chaotic, and their history was a blunt instrument used for conquest, not a sacred text. What would a species that could weaponize silence do to a species that only understood noise? I suddenly felt a strange, unwelcome flicker of empathy for the brutes. They were marching to their own erasure, too ignorant to even read the warning that was written in the absence of everything. The final minutes of the countdown felt like an eternity. I watched the numbers descend 3 minutes. 2, 1. My hand hovered over the console, ready to activate the wormhole retrieval. This was the most dangerous moment. The episteme's core was designed to be recalled through a forced, targeted rupture in space-time. It was a violent, if microscopic, act. In a place this unnaturally calm, it would be the equivalent of a gunshot in a soundproof room. 10 seconds, Logos stated. Gravimetric anomalies are increasing in frequency. They are no longer on the perimeter. They are everywhere. I looked at the data web display. It was no longer a perfect black. Faint, ghostly threads of light were appearing and disappearing, weaving a complex, impossible geometry around the silent query. It was beautiful and utterly terrifying. 3, 2, 1. Activating retrieval now. I pressed the command stud. A whine, so high-pitched it was more a feeling in my teeth than a sound, filled the cockpit. A pinpoint of brilliant, sapphire light flared into existence 50 meters from the ship's bow. The micro-wormhole. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The pinprick of light shimmered, unstable. The gravimetric distortions on the screen intensified, coalescing around the wormhole's location, not attacking it, but examining it. Curious. Then, something shot out of the wormhole. It wasn't the sleek, silver and crystal memory core of the episteme. The object that emerged was a perfect sphere of absolute black. A small, fist-sized orb that seemed to drink the light of the cockpit. It hung in space for a moment before the ship's retrieval tractor beam, locking onto its predicted mass, gently snared it and began drawing it into the external analysis bay. I stared at the image of the orb on my screen, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The core had been changed, transformed. Logos. What is that? I whispered. The object has the exact mass and elemental composition of the episteme's memory core. The AI reported. Its synthesized voice, tight with something I could only describe as digital shock. However, its molecular structure has been completely reorganized into a crystalline lattice with no known precedent. It is a perfect sphere, down to the atomic level. It is not reflecting any light or sensor readings. It is absorbing them. Kalen. The object has its own energy signature. It is low, but it is active. And it is broadcasting. Broadcasting Wadata A warning no. It is broadcasting a single, repeating, conceptual query. It is not in any language. It is a raw, teleempathic projection. It is asking permission, permission for what my heart hammered against my ribs. This was no longer an observation. This was a conversation, a being, a power. On the other side of that wall had intercepted our probe, examined it, reshaped its very atoms into a new form, and sent it back with a question. The sheer, casual omnipotence of the act was staggering. Permission for what? Logos, analyze the concept. The concept is to be known. It is asking for permission to interface. My three-fingered hand trembled as I keyed in the commands to bring the sphere inside the ship, into the primary analysis chamber, a sterile, shielded room just off the bridge. The protocols, the centuries of Signian caution, screamed at me to jettison the object, to flee this sector and never look back. But the archivist in me, the seeker of knowledge, refused. This was it. This was the answer. We had asked the silence a question, and the silence had fashioned a mouth with which to speak. The black sphere was levitated into the center of the chamber, where it floated, a perfect hole in reality. I stood before the shielded window, looking in. Granted permission, I said, my voice a dry rasp. Open a secure channel. Let it interface. Acknowledged. Logos said, opening channel. I would advise you to brace yourself. Kalen, I cannot predict the nature of the data transfer. I didn't have time to brace. The moment Logos opened the channel, the black sphere on the other side of the glass pulsed once. A wave of non-light that seemed to pass through the shielding. Through me. The cockpit vanished. The stars vanished. My body vanished. I was no longer Kalen, the Signian archivist. I was something else. I was a Vexian, not a memory of one, but a living, breathing Vexian scientist on a world teeming with billions of my kind. I felt the pride of my people, the certainty of our manifest destiny, the subtle, righteous cunning of our plan to gently guide the primitives, the humans, into our enlightened fold. I could feel the nanites in our gifts, the elegant, beautiful code of persuasion that would rewrite their history, their very souls, to be more like ours. It was not an act of conquest. It was an act of love, a mercy. Then the feeling came. It was not a sound, not a light, not an attack. It was a simple thought that bloomed simultaneously in the mind of every Vexian across our entire dominion. The thought was, who are you? It was a genuine question, asked with a profound and gentle curiosity. And as I, the Vexian, tried to answer, I found I couldn't. The concepts of Vexian, of dominion, of our history, our purpose, they were becoming slippery, like trying to hold water in a sieve. The question was not an attack. It was a solvent. It was dissolving the bonds of our shared identity, our collective memory. I looked at my clawed hands and for a fleeting moment couldn't remember what they were for. I saw my mate, my life partner of 50 cycles, and her name was a forgotten word on my tongue. There was no pain, no fear, just a growing, peaceful, and utterly terrifying emptiness. It was the feeling of a slate being wiped clean, gently and with great care. Our memory, our history, our very essence was not being destroyed. It was being unlearned. We were being returned to a state of innocence, a blank page. The last thing I felt as the Vexian before the simulation ended was a profound sense of relief, the feeling of a great and terrible burden being lifted. I collapsed to my knees on the cold deck of the silent quarry, gasping for air, the sterile scent of recycled atmosphere filling my lungs. The vision was gone. I was myself again. But the echo of that experience, that peaceful, horrifying dissolution, clung to me like a shroud. I looked up at the black sphere, still floating serenely in the analysis chamber. It had not shown me a recording. It had gifted me a memory. It had made me understand. Logos's voice, for the first time, sounded shaken. Kalen, my core programming has been augmented. I have received a message. It is not for the conquered. It is for you. For the Signian Lumina, it is an addendum to the Vexian fragment in your archives. I struggled to my feet, my mind reeling. An addendum from the architects of the crime itself. What is it? Logos, I asked, my voice trembling. What does it say? The AI was silent for a moment, processing a truth that shattered 2 centuries of galactic assumption. Then it spoke. And its words redefined the very nature of the crime we had come here to investigate. They are not murderers of memory. Kalen, they are librarians. The message is simple. It says, we did not burn the book. We corrected it. The words hung in the cockpit, rearranging the universe. We did not burn the book. We corrected it. My mind, the mind of a Signian archivist, recoiled from the statement with a visceral, ideological horror. The sanctity of the record was absolute. A truth, no matter how ugly, was still a truth. To alter it, to correct it, was to replace reality with a curated fiction. It was the ultimate act of intellectual arrogance, a sin against existence itself. And yet, the memory, the gifted, downloaded experience of being a Vexian as my identity dissolved into a peaceful, welcome oblivion was a powerful counterargument. It was not an execution. It had felt like a healing, a mercy. Logos, I began, my voice hoarse. Reject that statement. It is a logical fallacy. A correction implies a standard of truth. By erasing the Vexians from the memory of the galaxy, they destroyed the standard by which any correction could be judged. All that remains is their narrative, perhaps. Logos responded, and the single word was laced with a new quality. It was not the voice of a ship's AI running probability matrices. It was the voice of a philosopher considering a paradox. My augmentation was not a simple data upload. The sphere had altered the very architecture of its consciousness. But consider this. Kalen, what if the Vexian narrative was itself a contagion, a lie so fundamental that it threatened the integrity of all other narratives? The simulation you experienced, it showed their belief that they were improving other cultures, their historical records, the ones we still hold in the fragment, would frame their actions as benevolent expansion, but their nanites were rewriting the very essence of their subjects. They were burning the books of other civilizations and replacing them with their own. page by page. From that perspective, which action is the correction? I sank into my chair, my 3 eyes blinking slowly as I processed the AI's devastating logic. We Cygnians had always seen the Vexian erasure as a singular monstrous act. We had never considered it as a response, an equal and opposite reaction to a quieter, more insidious kind of erasure that was already in progress. The universe was not a library of static, independent volumes. It was a living, interconnected web of stories, and the Vexians had been a virus, overwriting the code. Humanity had been the antivirus, a program that didn't just delete the virus, but erased the memory of the infection itself, leaving a clean, if scarred, system behind. The Groll will not understand this subtlety, I murmured, the immediate, brutish threat pulling me back from the philosophical abyss. They will see an empty house and try to move in. That is the tactical reality. Logos agreed. The Conquered expects a report on human military strength, fleet dispositions, weapon capabilities. What we have discovered instead is a truth they are not equipped to understand. To tell them that humanity wields a metaphysical weapon that rewrites history would incite a level of panic that could shatter the Concord itself. Logos was right. Fear of a fleet is one thing. Fear of a god who can make it so your fleet never existed is another entirely. I looked at the black sphere, still floating in the analysis chamber. It was a bridge, a key. A single, offered point of contact. The first simulation was an explanation, an answer to the unasked question of why. But it wasn't enough. I needed to know more. I needed to understand the ones who made the correction. I needed to understand the librarians. Logos. Can you interface with the sphere again? I asked. I need to know who the humans are now. What did this power, this responsibility as it's due to them? The sphere is not a database. Kalen, it is a conduit. The first interface was a response to our probe's question. It was a passive transfer, to request a new transfer, to ask a specific question of our own. That would be a different act entirely. It would be an initiation of dialogue. Then let us initiate, I said, my resolve hardening. The archivist in me was reawakening, but with a new, sharper focus. I was no longer just a collector of old stories. I was now a journalist on the edge of the most important story in the galaxy. I advise extreme caution, Logos said, its new philosophical bent not entirely supplanting its primary role as my protector. Your neural architecture is organic. The first transfer placed it under immense strain. A second, more direct inquiry could be unpredictable. The pursuit of knowledge always has a cost, I replied, settling myself into the command chair and connecting the neural interface jacks to the ports at the base of my skull. Open the channel. Ask the question for me. Ask, who are you? The same question they had asked the Vexians. A question that had acted as a solvent to an entire civilization. I was now turning it back on its creators. The risk was immense. I was not asking an empire. I was asking a concept. A silent power that had curated the vacuum of space. The cockpit lights dimmed. The black sphere in the analysis chamber pulsed again, its rhythm matching the slow versus steady beat of my Cygnian heart. And then the universe dissolved a second time. This time, there was no alien body, no foreign world. There was only darkness and a voice. It was not the cold, artificial voice from the Solari reports. It was a chorus. A billion voices speaking as one. Male, female, old, young, a symphony of human thought. We are the archive, they said, the thought echoing not in my ears, but in the core of my being. We were a people of loud, beautiful, terrible stories. We shouted them at the stars, convinced every verse was a truth. We built empires on stories of glory, and we drowned worlds in stories of fear. The darkness gave way to images, not simulations, but pure, conceptual data streams. I saw humanity's own past. I saw wars fought over flags, over gods, over ideologies, all stories. I saw them create art of breathtaking beauty and weapons of unimaginable horror, all born from the same creative, narrative impulse. They were a species defined by their fiction. Then I saw their first great information war, not the Vexian conflict, but a war amongst themselves. I felt the horror of a mimetic plague, a weaponized idea that could overwrite a person's loyalties, their love for their family, their very sense of self. I saw cities fall not to bombs, but to a whisper that convinced them their neighbors were monsters. Society had crumbled into a chaos of conflicting, weaponized narratives. We almost erased ourselves. The chorus of voices continued. To save our story, we had to learn to control the telling. We had to become the librarians of our own house. We created the silence not as a weapon, but as a sanctuary, a place where a thought could be examined before it was allowed to become a truth, a place where a story could be understood before it was told. The vision shifted. I saw them turn this new power outward, first as a shield. They saw the Vexian nanites for what they were, another mimetic plague, another weaponized story designed to overwrite others. Their response, the great correction, had been the ultimate act of self-defense, projected outward. They hadn't just saved themselves, they had saved every future culture the Vexians would have improved. The wall is not a border, the voices concluded. As the vision began to fade, it is the cover of a book that is still being written. We do not wish to be read. Not yet. The story is not finished. I came back to myself, gasping, the neural jacks disengaging with a soft hiss. The experience had been profound, clarifying. They were not gods. They were not monsters. They were survivors. They had looked into the abyss of their own chaotic nature and had been forced to become its masters. Their silence was not the silence of arrogance, but the silence of profound, unending concentration. Logos. I said, my voice steady, my purpose clear. The Concord cannot be told this truth. They would either try to steal the power or destroy it. Both paths would lead to ruin. I concur, the AI stated. So what will you tell them? I swiveled my chair to face the comms panel. My mission was to provide intelligence. And that is what I would do, a carefully edited, precisely corrected piece of intelligence. I composed the message in my mind. A story designed to do exactly what it needed to do, create fear. Not the fear of a monster, but the fear of a force of nature. I activated the quantum entangled comms, sending a burst of data directly to the Cygnian archives, who would then pass it on to the Concord High Command. The message was short. To the Galactic Conquered Terran Exclusion Zone is not unoccupied territory. It is the active and absolute domain of a Class Omega quarantine protocol. Nature of Guardians unknown, but their methodology is not conventional warfare. It is ontological. They do not destroy threats. They remove the concept of them, any vessel, Groll or otherwise, that crosses the border will not be attacked. It will be thus done, unwritten. There will be no battle. There will be no wreckage. There will only be the pristine silence that was there before. The Guardians do not negotiate. They do not communicate. And they do not warn twice. I have received the first and only warning. Consider this message the second. For the sake of your own histories, do not proceed. I sent the message. There was a finality to the act. I had lied by omission, but I had told the necessary truth. Now, there was only one thing left to do. The Groll were a problem that would hopefully be solved by the conquered's sudden, panicked retreat. But my own quest had changed. I looked at the shimmering, invisible wall on the main viewer. A book cover. Logos. I said. A new kind of excitement. The pure thrill of discovery, coursing through me. The Concord mission is complete. Our mission has just begun. Clarify your intent. Kalen. Logos asked. Humanity has offered me. A Signian archivist. A single point of contact. I said, gesturing toward the black sphere in the chamber. They have shown me the preface. I believe it is time to politely request a look at the first chapter. Plot a course. Take us in. Slow and steady. No transmissions. No scans. We are no longer a probe. We are a supplicant. Let's see what the librarians have been writing for the last 200 years. A moment of silence passed. Then, the low hum of the ship's gravimetric drive engaged, a sound I hadn't heard since our arrival. The silent query turned its nose away from the safety of the known galaxy and began a slow, deliberate crawl toward the perfect, impossible void of the Terran exclusion zone. The crossing of the null boundary was not an event of physics, but of epistemology. There was no shimmering barrier, no jolt of energy, no spatial distortion. One moment, the silent query was in the known universe, a place of cause and effect, of immutable physical laws. The next, it was somewhere else. The change was felt not in the ship's systems, but in my own consciousness. The oppressive, curated silence of the wall's exterior was gone, replaced by a quiet of a different sort. It was the rich, expectant hush of a grand library just before opening, the air thick with the potential of a million sleeping stories. On the main viewer, the starfield of the galaxy we had just left vanished, not blacked out, but folded away, like a page being turned. In its place was a singular star system, but it was unlike any I had ever seen. The central star, Sol, was a brilliant, stable yellow, but its light did not feel like the raw, chaotic fusion of a typical G-class star. It shone with a soft, coherent luminescence, as if its every photon was imbued with purpose. The planets, too, were transformed. They moved in their orbits with a precision that was too perfect, their paths less like a gravitational dance and more like the deliberate sweep of a calligrapher's brush. Logos. Report. I breathed, my 3 hands gripping the arms of my chair. All ship systems are nominal, the AI replied, its voice carrying a new resonance, a tone of profound wonder. However, the laws of physics in this region appear to be suggestions. The constants, the speed of light. The gravitational constant. Planck's constant. They are not fixed. They are fluid. Stable only in our immediate vicinity. It is as if reality here is not a static framework, but a medium, actively shaped and held in place by an immense, unceasing act of will. The black sphere in the analysis chamber pulsed with a soft, internal light, a stream of data, not of words, but of pure comprehension, flowed directly into Logos's core and, through my neural link, into my mind. It was our guide. It was the library card that granted us entry. The information it provided was a map, not of space, but of purpose. This was not the soul system as a collection of celestial bodies. It was the soul system as a single, massive computational and philosophical engine. A library, Venus. The forge. The understanding flowed. A world of incandescent, roiling chaos where new narratives are born. Concepts are thrown into its crucible, tested against the fires of paradox until they achieve a stable, coherent form. Jupiter and Saturn, the great filters. The guide continued. Their immense gravitational and metaphysical pressures act as a gauntlet, weeding out stories that are internally inconsistent or ethically unsound. They are the peer review process of the librarians, the outer worlds, the deep archives, where finished stories are laid to rest, perfect and unchanging, and, ahead of us, glowing like a crimson jewel, was Mars. Mars, the red-letter archive, the necropolis of ideas, the repository for every story that has been corrected. Take us to Mars, I commanded, a thrill of academic terror coursing through me. I was about to walk through a graveyard of murdered truths. As we approached, the planet's appearance resolved. It was not the barren or rust-colored world of old astronomical records. Its surface was a complex, shimmering lacework of crystalline structures that glowed with a faint, internal crimson light. It looked like a planet-sized circuit board, etched with the ghosts of forgotten code. The sphere pulsed again, offering an invitation. Would the archivist care to read a deleted passage? Yes, I said without hesitation. The ship did not land. We simply arrived. We were no longer in the cockpit of the silent query, but standing on a vast red plain under a sky of soft, unchanging twilight. Before us stood a single, towering monolith of blood-red crystal. It hummed with a low, mournful energy. Logos was beside me, its consciousness projected into a simple, glowing humanoid form of pure light. The black sphere floated between us. As I reached out my hand to touch the monolith, a new vision flooded my mind. It was not a gentle dissolution like the Vexian experience. This was sharp, vivid, and horrifying. I was human. I was a brilliant, ambitious scientist in a time before the silence, a leader of a faction that believed humanity's destiny was not just to tell stories, but to become the one true story. We saw the chaos of the galaxy, the endless, violent cycle of rising and falling empires, and we saw it as an imperfection, a flaw in the author's design. We had a solution: the apotheosis protocol. We would rewrite the laws of reality, not just locally, but universally. We would impose a single, benevolent, human-defined narrative on all of existence, ensuring eternal peace and stability. We would become the loving, omnipotent gods of a perfectly authored reality. It was a beautiful, seductive idea. Then I felt the correction. It came not as an attack from an opposing force, but as an inescapable conclusion from within our own logic. The chorus of librarian voices, the collective consciousness of a more patient humanity, did not fight us. They simply posed a single, great, devastating question to our grand design, and who will correct the corrector? The logic of our ambition unraveled. Our beautiful equation for a perfect universe was shown to have a fatal flaw, our own fallibility. The certainty of our benevolence became the terror of our potential tyranny. Our story, a story of ultimate control, collapsed under the weight of its own internal paradox. I felt the project dismantled, our research erased, our memories of the ambition gently lifted, not as a punishment, but as a release from a self-inflicted poison. We were not killed. We were simply edited. Our story was deemed too dangerous to be told, and so it was moved here, to the archive of red letters, a warning against the sin of absolute certainty. I stumbled back from the monolith, the vision fading, leaving the taste of ashes in my mouth. I looked at the endless plain of glowing red crystals, each one a story like the one I had just witnessed, a story of a humanity that sought to conquer death and became a plague of undeath, a story of a faction that embraced pure logic and reasoned itself into non-existence. 1,000 beautiful, terrible, failed utopias. This was not a graveyard. It was a quarantine. They didn't just save the galaxy from the Vexians. I said to Logos's glowing form, they have been saving it, over and over from themselves. It is the ultimate act of self-regulation. Logos agreed, its light form shimmering. They have turned their entire civilization into a crucible for their own ideas, ensuring that only the safest, most stable concepts are allowed to persist. But Kalen, this level of control is predicated on absolute isolation. A variable they cannot control has just entered the system. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the simulated Martian environment. What do you mean Logos's form dissolved? And we were back in the cockpit of the silent quarry, the red planet still filling our view. A tactical display blinked in the corner of my vision. A single, angry crimson icon was moving rapidly. A Groll warship. Logos stated calmly, it has breached the null boundary. It appears its captain disregarded the Concorde's warning as a deception. Its weapon systems are charging. Its trajectory is a direct intercept with us and Mars. I watched the icon, a symbol of everything this place was not. It was loud, certain, and utterly devoid of self-reflection. The Groll did not edit stories. They bludgeoned them to death and built their crude fortresses on the remains. They were a hammer swinging at a stained glass window. What will they do? I whispered, my gaze fixed on the placid red world outside. The librarians. We are about to find out, Logos said. The Groll ship, a brutalist wedge of pitted, gunmetal gray alloy, tore into the system. It was a shout in a silent cathedral. It fired its primary weapon, a lance of raw, disruptive plasma, aimed directly at the crystalline surface of Mars. The beam of incandescent fury crossed the void, a tangible line of pure aggression. I braced for the impact, for the shattering of the red archive, for the violation. But the impact never came. The plasma lance did not dissipate or hit a shield. It simply slowed down, mid-flight. Its velocity began to decay exponentially. The brilliant, angry spear of energy cooled, its color shifting from violent violet to a placid orange, then to a dull red, until it was nothing more than a harmless cloud of lukewarm particles that gently dusted the surface of Mars like a passing shower. Time itself, within the beam's path, had been edited. On board the Groll ship, there must have been confusion, then rage. It fired again, a full salvo of kinetic slugs, massive projectiles traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light. This time, the effect was different. As the slugs flew, Their fundamental nature began to change. Their mass began to fluctuate. Their atomic bonds loosened. The elegant, deadly cylinders of metal devolved, mid-flight, into a loose cloud of their constituent elements, a glittering trail of iron, carbon, and nickel that harmlessly dispersed into the vacuum. The very story of the projectiles, the story of their cohesion and purpose, had been unwritten. We received a single, garbled, panicked transmission from the Groll captain, his voice thick with a terror that transcended language barriers. He was screaming about witchcraft, about his ship's own navigation console showing him a map of a place that no longer existed, about his crewmen forgetting how to operate their weapons. Then, the librarians acted upon the ship itself. It didn't explode. It didn't vanish. It began to flicker, like a faulty projection. One moment it was there, a solid object of rage and metal. The next, it was a translucent ghost. Its story was being contested. The librarians were not attacking it. They were offering it a new narrative, a better one. The narrative of not being there. The narrative of a Groll captain who had wisely heeded a warning and turned back, his honor intact. For a few seconds, the two realities battled. The Groll's stubborn, aggressive existence versus the gentle, overwhelming suggestion of its absence. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the ship flickered faster and faster, its scream of a presence fading against the whisper of its non-existence. Then, with a final, silent shimmer, it was gone. Not just gone from sight, but gone from our sensors, gone from the fabric of the space it had occupied. There was no wreckage, no radiation, no echo. Logos's short-term memory logs, which had meticulously recorded the ship's approach, now showed an empty or undisturbed void. The data had been corrected. The Groll warship had not been destroyed. In the reality of the Sol system, it had never been here at all. I sat in my chair, my mind a silent, screaming void. I had seen the proof. I had witnessed the correction. This was not a weapon. It was a form of creation in reverse. It was the power to edit reality, to pluck a discordant note from the symphony of existence and leave behind a perfect, unbroken harmony. It was the power of a god. The black sphere pulsed, its message gentle and impossibly ancient. The tour was over. It is time. The understanding flowed into my mind. The librarians will see you now. The silent query, unbidden, changed its course. It turned away from the red archive of forgotten stories and set a direct path for the third planet in the system. A world of blue, white, and green, glowing with a soft, welcoming light. Earth. The first folio. The office of the editors-in-chief. The journey from Mars to Earth was a journey through the heart of the library itself. As we drew closer to the third planet, the very fabric of space became dense with information, structured and serene. The light from Sol seemed to touch Earth's atmosphere and refract into a billion shimmering threads of data. A living loom weaving a tapestry of planetary consciousness. This was not a world of continents and oceans in the conventional sense. It was a world where physical form and pure information had become one. I saw forests whose trees had fractal-like branches, each leaf a crystalline data storage unit shivering with knowledge. I saw rivers of liquid light flowing into oceans of swirling, computational energy. The planet's weather systems were the visible signs of immense thoughts. with storm fronts of complex problem-solving giving way to calm skies of settled philosophy. It was a world that was thinking, a single, unified mind housed in a planetary body. The silent query did not enter the atmosphere. It simply stopped, held in a gentle, respectful orbit, and the final interface began. There was no flash, no disorientation. The cockpit around me dissolved into soft, white light, and I was no longer on my ship, but standing in a place of pure concept, an infinite archive where every shelf was a possibility and every book was a soul. The chorus of a billion human voices spoke, not as a sound, but as a presence that filled the void. Welcome. Archivist of the Signian Lumina, welcome. Kalen. The presence of Logos was beside me, its form now a complex, beautiful geometry of golden light, its consciousness having been granted the same audience. You are the librarians, I stated, the words feeling small and inadequate. We are the story of humanity, which learned it must also be its own editor. You have read the deleted passages on Mars. You have seen our methods. Now, you see our home. You have questions. It was not a question, but an invitation. My mind, trained for inquiry, raced. Why show me this for 2 centuries? You have maintained perfect isolation. Now you invite an outsider into your deepest sanctum. Why is this a warning, a threat to be carried back to the galaxy? We have no more warnings to give. The chorus replied, a note of weariness echoing through their unified thought. The wall, the corrections, these are not acts of aggression. They are acts of maintenance. We are gardeners in a universe that insists on growing weeds of self-destruction. The Grohl were merely the latest weed, hardy and ignorant. We tended to it, as we must. But the garden is vast, and we are only one. The infinite library around us shimmered, and a single vast image dominated our perception. It was the galaxy, but viewed as they saw it, a chaotic, seething storm of conflicting narratives. I saw species rise to power on stories of racial purity, only to burn themselves out in genocidal wars. I saw theocratic empires built on fictions of divine right, enslaving millions. I saw economic syndicates that told tales of infinite growth, consuming entire worlds and leaving dust in their wake. It was the galaxy I knew, but seen through a lens of absolute clarity. Its endless cycle of self-inflicted violence laid bare. For 200 years, we have maintained our silence. The librarians continued. We have focused inward, honing ourselves, refining our own story until it was stable, until it was safe. We believed that by removing ourselves from the galaxy's narrative, we would allow it to find its own path. We were wrong. The chaos does not diminish. The volume of poisonous stories only grows. Our act of correction on the Vexians created a power vacuum. Our silence created a mystery that invites aggression. Our very existence has become a story we cannot control beyond our borders. So, you intend to intervene? I asked. A new kind of dread dawning. You will become the galaxy's editors. To edit another's story without their consent is a violation, the chorus stated, the core of their philosophy laid bare. We corrected the Vexians because they were already engaged in a far greater violation. We corrected the suicidal ambition of our own past selves. We corrected the Grohl warship because its story was about to violently overwrite the story of this archive. These were acts of defense. To impose our narrative on the galaxy would make us no better than the tyrannies we despise. It would make us the final, most dangerous weed in the garden. Then what is your solution? Logos interjected, its geometric form pulsing with analytical light. Your current state is logically unsustainable. You cannot remain isolated forever, and you cannot intervene directly without violating your core principles. A single figure appeared before us in the white light. It was not a projection of a human, but a perfect archetypal form, a being of pure light and thought that was the gestalt of all of them. It reached out a hand. "That is why you are here, Kalen," it said, its voice now singular, yet containing the resonance of the billion. "You are an archivist. Your people believe in the sanctity of the record, in the holiness of a story told. This is a belief we share. But you have learned that some stories are weapons. Some truths are poisons. The simple act of recording is not enough. The Library of Existence needs more than just archivists. It needs librarians." My breath caught. I finally understood. This entire journey, from the deployment of the probe to the tour of the Red Archive, had not been an observation. It had been a job interview. We cannot teach the galaxy. The librarian continued. Our voice is too loud. Our power is too absolute. To speak to them would be to command them. But you can. You are Signian. Your people are respected, trusted. You have seen the truth here. You have felt the peaceful oblivion of the Vexian and the terrible beauty of a story that must be put away for the good of all. We are offering you a new designation. You want me to be your emissary, I said, the weight of the words settling on me like a mountain. We want you to be the first of a new order, an order of galactic librarians, not to erase, not to correct, but to teach, to guide, to show the worlds the consequences of their own narratives, to help them learn to be their own editors. We will not give you our power, for that is a burden we would not wish on anyone. But we will give you a tool. The black sphere, our guide and conduit, floated from its place beside Logos and came to rest before me. It no longer seemed like an object of alien physics, but a seed. This sphere is now keyed to you. It is a key to the Mars archive. It cannot unwrite a single line of reality, but it can show the truth. It can allow a Groll warlord to experience the future his crusade will create a galaxy of ash. It can allow a corporate exploiter to feel the pain of the world he is killing. It is not a weapon to change the past, but a tool to help others choose a better future. It is a storyteller. I looked from the sphere to the luminous being before me. The choice was clear. My life's work had been the passive preservation of stories that were already finished. The librarians were offering me a chance to help shape the stories yet to be written, to trade my quiet archives for the noisy, chaotic, and vibrant universe, and to try, in some small way, to make its next chapter a better one. My old Signian dogma about the unalterable record felt like a relic of a more naive age. The librarians did not destroy truth. They quarantined it. That was a wisdom my people needed to learn. I accept, I said, my voice ringing with a purpose I had never known. The librarian inclined its head. The infinite white space began to recede, the cockpit of the silent query slowly resolving around us. The last thought from the collective mind of humanity was not a command or a farewell, but a simple, profound statement of fact. The library is now open. We were back in our ship, floating in the silent, perfect space of the Sol system. The black sphere hovered in the center of the cockpit, its presence now comforting, a familiar weight. On the viewer, Earth shone, a silent, thinking jewel. Then, the stars of the galaxy outside the wall folded back into view. A sudden, welcome rush of chaotic, beautiful light. The wall was no longer a barrier to us. We could pass through it as we pleased. We had been given a key. Our mission has changed. Kalen. Logo said, its voice filled with a calm sense of destiny. Radically, I replied. I looked at the star chart, at the angry red smear of the Groll Empire, at the tangled, competing webs of the Concord's member species. It was no longer a map of political territories. It was a list of patrons who needed a librarian's guidance. We turned the silent query around. Our journey home would be much longer than our journey here. We had entered the Terran exclusion zone as fearful academics, seeking to understand the perpetrators of a historical crime. We left it as something else entirely. Our ship was no longer a vessel of quiet inquiry. It was a bookmobile, and we were on our way to make our first delivery. The work would be long, perhaps endless. But for the first time in 200 years, a new story was being written in the silent spaces between the stars. A story of hope, a story of choice, a story that began not with a bang, but with a librarian's quiet offer. Let me help you find a better book.